103.2 Preston FM.
Your community.
Your radio.
Ubiga and Mambo number 5, and I think I'll be doing that with the neighbours tonight in the close. That's if I can get them over the worries about the dustbins. But that's another story. I think we've resolved the dustbins, hopefully. Anyway, a very good afternoon to you. Good afternoon, Maureen. It's lovely to see you again.
It's lovely to see you again, Hugh, as well. Thank you for waiting patiently.
Traffic very busy then out there?
Oh, God, yeah, coming via Penwitham, yeah, it was. I just sort of got as far as even before the police station. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be late. So I was panicking a little bit, but I got here.
Lovely. And yesterday, Maureen and I were talking on the telephone, and Maureen was saying to me about today and about the interview and what we're going to discuss. And I must admit, this actually brought memories back to me. When I was a child growing up, my parents, grandparents never would question doctors or other health professionals, or they wouldn't ask about the medication they were being given. They wouldn't really, it was one of those things, particularly then, that you never questioned a doctor or a health professional.
Yeah.
And you and I were talking about that yesterday, and it would appear that I certainly personally don't have a problem these days in doing that, unless I forget the question when I'm there. But for some people, it still is an issue, apparently, is it?
Yeah, it was really odd on, I don't know whether some of your listeners are actually are on Twitter, but on Twitter, the various professionals have certain days where they do chats, and you can it's basically for an hour and you ask whatever you want. On this Tuesday, there was one that comes under hashtag Our D, which is basically a part of, I think, Diabetes UK, and they had a guest on there that was saying that had 4 questions and wanted people to answer these 4 questions. And it's a charity called Diabetics with Eating Disorders, which really, I know this sounds silly because I'm a diabetes specialist nurse, and when I've sort of reflected on it, it actually made sense. But I'd never put the two together. But when you sort of sit back and think, diabetes, food, what I can have, what I can't have, actually the two go together. So I joined into the tweet chat, basically because I know this sounds a bit what's the word I can think of? I don't know, selfish really, but I was doing it because I wanted questions for today, because people hadn't been answering my Twitters that I've been putting on. As the evening pursued, as these questions were going on, it was really interesting to find out that the actual people who live with diabetes sometimes don't actually ask health professionals the questions that they need to ask, which on talking later on to another diabetes specialist nurse that's based over in Tameside, we were both quite taken aback. And to be honest, I was quite upset, because I was thinking, when I've had patients in front of me, have they felt the same thing, that they couldn't ask me a question? And I'm just looking at some of the things, because I wrote down some of the things that were said. There was somebody who was actually diagnosed earlier on this year, and when they actually went to see their dietitian for the first time, they said, I don't like food. So you sort of have this image, and I know as a health professional, I could imagine that then other health professional could actually get quite on the defensive, as though that person is being awkward. But then as you go on with this conversation that was going on, it was evident that this does happen. And then there was another person that came in and intersected and joined in the conversation. They said, that was the first thing I said to my dietitian when I met her. But they said, now I love food at the time when they're eating it, but hate it afterwards.
Yes.
So it does make you just stop and think a little bit. And I know as a healthcare professional that working in diabetes, I've actually learnt something. So I'm actually grateful for that tweet chat, and I'm actually grateful for the conversations that actually went on in that hour, because people were being so honest and they were basically laying themselves bare, which was really, really great. So there were other questions, like they were asking about what services would they want, if they could ask for like a wish list of what they would want from healthcare professionals. And they were saying things like, and this is a big thing, and I was very fortunate in my early career of diabetes. I worked within school nursing and was responsible for children with diabetes. So I was attached to the Queen's Park Hospital up at Blackburn. And we had an absolutely amazing paediatrician, Dr. Giovanni, who's now passed, bless him. But he had with us, working within our team, we had clinical psychologists. And at the time, when I'm going back now to 91, 92, so that was like really fresh to me. It was just like innovative, it just felt like part of the process. And a lot of the information that came out of this was the fact that there is very little access to psychologists regarding diabetes. Now, a lot of the people that were talking in this chat had type 1 diabetes, and as I've explained in the past, type 1 diabetes is when your pancreas isn't producing insulin at all, so it's usually the younger end, and they usually start straight onto insulin. So that's what we were dealing with, because we were dealing with children. And we found it really helpful, because especially when you get to the teenage years, where and I'm not saying, no, that's wrong, that's the wrong word altogether, but as a teenager, it's very difficult to engage with your elders, and it's very difficult to sort of like explain yourself or what you're feeling, so it's very frustrating. But the clinical psychologist was absolutely amazing, because they became like the gateway almost into a different world, and made it easier for people to accept it and come on board and then engage with the diabetes and move forward. So as I was going through all this, they were saying that that's what they needed. With the eating disorder, what they have said is that they also would like to have clinical psychologists who deal with eating disorders, and also diabetes specialist nurses who have an understanding of this. And I have to say, it's sort of like, I don't know, it's like a great big light's gone on off in my head. And again, I'm on my I don't know, my great march of sort of like, I've got a new thing to sort of like move forward with. I'm not going to even contemplate taking it on board, because I've got so much other stuff to come on board, but I'm just throwing it out there, because I would imagine that there's listeners out there that do have a particular problem that doesn't necessarily sit on the straight and narrow of how we perceive diabetes, or what we would come in front of on a day-to-day basis. And that would be great, because I know that when we had the conversation yesterday, it's very difficult, because I've now read all this of people saying that they find it very difficult to engage with health professionals, because health professionals have got one-track minds and go one way, and they don't look outside of the box. The fact that when they ask a question, they don't necessarily get told what they actually want to hear, because the issue isn't being addressed. It's almost as if the healthcare professional is on one path, and the actual person living with the diabetes on a different path, and they're not actually meeting up the crossing ways. So I'm actually wondering whether the idea of, when I come in to do these talks, if people would actually prefer if we did a topic rather than question and answers. And if that is the case, then I would really love to either for you to contact Huey via Twitter or Facebook, or even myself, because I think that would be really useful and really helpful.
And I mean, when someone is diagnosed initially with diabetes, I mean, for some people, presumably it's quite a shock at the time. And although diabetes is a word that most people have in their vocabulary, a lot of people don't really know what it is. I found out so much about diabetes from being with you. But how much information is given to somebody at that point of diagnosis?
It's really, really hard, because now, because of the way that the structures of services are now, you are under a great deal of time constraint. But I'm a bit of a rebel, so I'm sort of like given a time, and you usually find my waiting room's full, because if somebody asks me a question, then I'm going to answer it. I'm not just going to ignore it, because that question is important to the person. But when somebody's diagnosed, it's very difficult, because it's how to gauge how much you tell them and how much you don't tell them, because as you can imagine, diabetes is such a massive subject, and there is so much to learn. I know that here in Preston, that somebody who's newly diagnosed is actually asked if they want to go on what's called the Desmond course, which is like a patient-structured education, and a lot of areas in the country do this, where it's all research based and evidence based. And it basically, you go in, and a lot of people are very scared of group session education, and I will hold my hand up, and I would be one of them, because I'm very much of a learner, and I'd like, oh God, do I have to? But I would go out of curiosity. The thing that happens there is that you think you're going to be taught like in the classroom, but you're not. What happens is they're asked questions, and you answer, and within a group of say 10 of you who have diabetes, and perhaps another 10 that are there who are partners or carers, you're asked the question, you answer it, and then within that group somebody will say, oh well, this happened to me and that happened to me, and you do it as a learning set, so you all learn together. But what you do end up finding out is that you actually know more about diabetes than you actually think you do, because like you say, it's in the everyday conversation. You may have read an article, thought you haven't absorbed it, and then find out somebody says something and you actually know that answer, which surprises you because you wonder where you know it from. But it's because we actually, as human beings, we actually absorb things superficially without even realising that we're actually absorbing them. But the greatest person which came out of this day, this event that happened, that was just an hour on Tuesday night, it's absolutely amazed me, it's blown my brain. But in that hour, what I did learn was, and what I've always said is that the person who is the expert is the patient. It's not the person sat opposite you. The healthcare professional, yes, they've specialised in it. They know the theoretical side. They know the up-to-date research. They know the up-to-date evidence to make sure that you stay on the straight path, so that you don't sort of have any complications, because that's what we're trying to do. But really, you know your diabetes any better than anybody else, because even if I was sat in front of you as a diabetes specialist nurse with diabetes, my diabetes, whether it be type 1 or type 2, the same as you, would be a very different experience to your experience of diabetes. So I can't stress it enough to people that you actually know more about your diabetes than you think you do. But if ever you go to your healthcare professionals, you're sat in front of you and you are concerned or worried about anything, please, because I've read some of these transcripts, people have been frightened to say something. They've been frightened to say something because they don't want to look like a fool. They don't want to feel inadequate. There's one lady that's written and written down how she not that she felt embarrassed, but she felt as if she let everybody down. So if she's gone through, and this lady has gone through, she knows what she's doing, and her control has been really okay, and it's been okay for a week or so, and then say for 1 or 2 days, her control is out of control for no unknown reason, that person actually feels bad because of it. They feel guilty about it, and that makes me feel really sad, because at the end of the day, it's about you having the ownership of your condition, not the condition having ownership of you. And also the healthcare professional, you're not looking after yourself for your nurse, for your doctor. You're actually looking after yourself for me. Not for me, sorry, for you yourself. I'm a bit...
So, Maureen, what we're not talking about here, are we? Or probably maybe some of the cases, if you have a group practice of GPs, then you must hear, and I hear, and I sometimes do the same thing. Sometimes you will choose a doctor you like. You will see a doctor and maybe you don't like them, so you choose someone else.
Yeah.
Is that the kind? Was that some of the instances in the discussion on Twitter? Are we saying that some of the people couldn't ask the professionals because they didn't have a relationship with those professionals?
Yeah, that was what was coming out of some, not all of them, but some of them. It was coming out of that they felt that they didn't have. It came across to me that it may be the way that I've interpreted it, but it may be because it's just because this is something that I'm so passionate about. But it came across as though if you were sat, and I could understand that, because if it would me, I would be absolutely the same. And I have, without shaming and naming, but I have come across health professionals and I thought, oh my God, thank God you don't look after me. Because it is a matter of attitude. And a lot of them were that they were actually sat there and the nurse hadn't, and it may be because the person that you sat in front of just hasn't grasped it. But it's very hard, because it's hard to make a relationship with who's a complete stranger. They're a complete stranger coming into your life to help you with what you're doing to live every day. If you haven't got that rapport with that person, you're going to walk out of that room far more frustrated than you were when you went into the room. And if you're anything like me, which I'm horrendous at, if something has narked me or rubbed me up the wrong way, it takes me a little bit of while to get over it before I can move forward. And I would imagine there's a lot of people out there that do feel like that. So yeah, I would say that there are some people that have to see health professionals they don't necessarily want to see. But also, what really concerns me, if that is happening, then you're not turning up for your appointments. That really is a problem, because at the end of the day, even if you do have a difficulty in expressing how you feel and how you want to change things, it is important that you still attend those appointments, because you may be surprised and one day you walk through the door and it might be a different person. So all I'm saying is the appointments are important. They may feel like they're not because you may feel okay, but it's our way of checking that something's not going wrong before it can cause a major disaster.
And would you also recommend that maybe you write the questions down before you meet the professional?
Yeah, definitely. I always say that to people as they're walking out. I say, if you've got any questions, however stupid you think it is, if it's important to you, it's important, and write it down and bring it with you to the next consultation, and we'll go through it. There was like consultants involved, and there was GPs that were on there, and other nurses that were involved in the chat, and a lot of the doctors were just saying that at the end of the day, the whole idea about diabetes now is that the person living with the diabetes, they are in control of their care, because we understand that now. When I started in diabetes nursing, it was very much prescriptive, and I can honestly say that I used to feel really upset if somebody came in with poor diagnosis and couldn't get it right, because I felt it was my fault, which is just the kind of person I am. I realise that that's not the case now, because you can't. Diabetes isn't as straightforward as people think it is, and what it needs to be expressed really in, I sound like a doom and gloomer today, but I'm not. But the important thing is that type 1 and type 2 need to be controlled as well as they do for each other. That there is no difference. I don't think there is any difference in saying, oh, I haven't got the bad one, I've got this one, or that one's worse than the other. It's diabetes. So if you've got diabetes, take it seriously and look after yourselves.
And I know you were saying that you were quite taken aback by the tweets and about the other night, but I suppose also in a positive way for quite a few professionals, it would make people think as to what they were seeing and hearing. Yeah,
because the amazing thing about it is, and it made me feel quite stupid, which is good. It's not a bad thing, because there's been some article written up, and I know this has got nothing to do with patients, it's more to do with nurses, the profession, but they were saying like continual professional development can actually happen through social media, and if anything, that's what this has done, because it's highlighted a problem that somebody has spoken to me about it, but I don't think I'd really understood how big the problem was, and it was this was like a real kick up the backside, and it was a case of, oh my God, this really is a big issue. And then when I sort of broke it down logically, it was then, well, it would be, wouldn't it? Because you're dealing with food all the time. And I mean, I can remember my aunt, when she was diagnosed, and this is like years ago, and she was diagnosed, and she was saying, I can't even have an OXO cube. And I went, what? And started laughing. And I said, what are you on about? There's sugar in it. And I went, I know there's sugar in it, my love, but by the time you've diluted it and put it in whatever you're going to put it in, the amount of sugar that it is just basically a trace. But can you imagine if she hadn't have had me, and if that was just her explained to her in simple terms, when you see that and it's got sugar written on it, what you're going to believe? You're going to be believing that what you're doing is you're just basically eating sugar, which is why we are in every kind of sort of like in nutrition and in dietetics now, it is so much for the push that we go back to the old way where, well, I've always done this anyway because it's the way I was brought up, but the way that our mums, our grandmas used to cook, where you cook from scratch, so you actually know what's been put in front of you.
So just to round this off before I do ask you one question that's come in from a listener, what would we then say, just to kind of summarise this to maybe somebody listening who has got appointments coming up? But I mean, this in many respects will apply to many conditions, but we're focusing on diabetes here. Somebody who's got an appointment coming up, maybe if they do find, and sometimes it's us, isn't it? If we don't think somebody smiles the right way, maybe they're having a bad day, maybe they've had a bad day. It could be that it's not a personal thing. Yeah. But if you're going to see a professional, what would we say to them really about, it is your chance to ask those questions that are really important.
If it's really important to you and it is really causing you a major concern, however tiny it is, ask the question. The same as if you have blood results done, which is, I know that it's encouraged in diabetes, and I would imagine it's encouraged in other conditions as well. When they give you the results, take 5 minutes to write down what those results are and keep a diary. If they do your blood pressure, keep a diary of what blood pressure it is, so that when you go to the next appointment, you're already there, and then you'll get your next set of results. And if those results are better, just think how great you will feel walking out of the door. And that's what it's about. It's about you taking control of you again. And that was another point that came up in this discussion, was about the fact that they didn't like the fact that of health professionals having control in their appointments and health professionals having control of their bodies, because at the end of the day, the body belongs to you. So it's about you taking charge of that appointment. It's your appointment. So if you go, yes, you have to go through whatever the clinic is about and making sure all the checks are done, but there's something there that you're concerned about and you want to know more about, ask the question. If you're ever stuck for information, and I always promote this because they're absolutely amazing, there are loads of diabetes charities out there, but the main one that we all know about is Diabetes UK. So just click on to Google Diabetes UK, it'll come up, and there's loads of information. And I think there's even a care line on there that you can actually ring up and speak to somebody, so that they can actually answer your question if you haven't had it answered when you go to your consultation.
Lovely, thank you. And a question for you before we end. It's from Cheryl, and Cheryl was asking, can a person suffer from type 1 and type 2 diabetes at the same time?
This causes a lot of confusion for people. There are people out there who get late diagnosis and get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. With the progression of type 2 diabetes, because it is a progressive disorder, you can then end up with the signs and symptoms of type 1, which means that you've got type 2, you've started on diet, you've gone on to tablets, and then you start on injectable insulin, so you start having insulin. It doesn't mean that the diabetes diagnosis has changed from type 1 into type 2. It means that you're a type 2 person with type 2 diabetes who is controlled with insulin.
Right, thank you. Maureen, a pleasure as always to meet you, and I look forward to our next meeting. So thank you for coming in, and hope the journey home is a little, easier than the one here. Yes,
just
please
one more
do.
Again. I'm really sorry because I'm reiterating this again, saying
Please
it again.
do.
But if anybody would prefer it that we did it via a topic rather than questions and answers, please just let us know, because it's no hassle for me, because I just look it up and then sit here and talk to you about it till you know more. And thank you ever so much for listening. I do appreciate it.
Thank you, Maureen, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
For all the latest community news and events,
103.2 Preston FM.
Your community, your radio.